On Wednesday night, outside of the Capitol Jewish Museum in Washington, D.C., a gunman opened fire and murdered 2 young people because he thought they were Jews, because they were gathered in a Jewish place, and because they were there for an event hosted by a Jewish organization. Before I tell you about their alleged killer and the culture of lies that created the climate for his rampage, I want to tell you about the 2 people that he cut down. And I want to do that because I promise you that there will be no campaigns or hashtags or celebrity videos urging all of us to say their names. Yaron Lischinsky and Sarah Milgrim, those are their names. They met at work. They were staffers at the Israeli embassy, and they fell in love. Yaron, who was 30 years old, had purchased an engagement ring for Sarah, who was 26, just a few days ago. They were meant to fly to Israel this coming Sunday so that she could meet his parents, who live in Jerusalem, before he proposed. Yaron was born in Israel to a Jewish father and a Christian mother. He was raised partly in Germany, and he spoke German perfectly, but also Hebrew and Japanese. And in the mixed nature of his life, Yaron embodied the very best of the West and the openness of our civilization. His friend, Mariam Waba, a Coptic Christian born in Egypt but now living in the States, called him a kind and generous friend, a devout Christian, and a defender of Israel. We would sit for hours, she said, and debate early Christian theology over gin and tonics. And she said that he would check on her after every attack on Christians in Egypt. And there are a lot of them. Sarah Milgrim was a Jew raised in Kansas who began working at the Israeli embassy in November 2023, a month after the Hamas massacre of October 7th. She had 2 master's degrees, one in international studies from American University and a second in sustainable development from the United Nations University for Peace. Sarah was an idealist. She volunteered with an organization called Tech to Peace, which supports entrepreneurship and dialogue between young Palestinians and Israelis. When Sarah was a high school senior in 2017, some swastikas appeared graffitied on her public high school, and she was interviewed about it for the local television station at the time. I worry about going to my synagogue, and now I have to worry about safety at my school, she said, and that shouldn't be a thing. That Yaron Lischinsky and Sarah Milgrim happened to be at an event about delivering humanitarian relief across the Middle East, including to Palestinians in Gaza, was of no concern to their alleged murderer. He was there to free Palestine, the slogan he shouted after he executed them in cold blood on the sidewalk. According to several witnesses, after the shooting, he reached into a bag, pulled out a keffiyeh, and said, "I did this for Gaza." That might sound nonsensical to ordinary people. How would killing 2 Israeli embassy staffers in D.C. improve the situation in Gaza? But of course, one could ask the same question about the slaughter of some 1,200 men, women, and children by Hamas militants who invaded Israel on a Jewish holiday in October of 2023 and brought so much ruin onto the Palestinians of Gaza. But the shooter's evil worldview has a demented logic, and as he proved earlier this week, it is a risk to us all. It is a worldview that says that Jews and those who support Jews and the Jewish state, wherever they live, are now acceptable targets. It's a worldview that insists that a beautiful young couple, a man and woman in love, might look like innocents to the uninitiated, when in fact they are monsters deserving of death. One of the things I found when I went looking for news about the murder of Yaron Lischinsky and Sarah Milgrim was a video taken on October 12th, 2023. And in it, you see about a dozen people, many of them wearing masks, waving Palestinian flags in front of that same museum in Washington. It's really strange to watch it now. Some people are shouting slogans, others are beating drums, a few other people hold up signs. If anyone even noticed the protest among the chaos that began in this country on October 8th, they probably dismissed it as a few kooks. Or maybe they ignored it entirely, as if it were ever normal to target a Jewish museum in order to protest a war in the Middle East against a terrorist group funded by Iran. As if these kind of protests ever had anything at all to do with Palestine. But then, over the weeks and months that followed, the flags turned into chants to globalize the Intifada. And professional talkers dismissed that slogan as a metaphor, and not for what it always was and is, which is demand for open season on Jews worldwide. The more elite the institutions, the more the people that populate them shouted globalize the Intifada, the more they glorified evil. At George Washington University, students projected the words "Glory to our martyrs" and "Free Palestine from the river to the sea" in giant letters on campus buildings. At Cooper Union in Manhattan, Jewish students had to hide in the library from a mob of their fellow students pounding on the doors and the windows. At Harvard, more than 30 student groups signed a petition that found a way to blame Jewish and Israeli victims for their own deaths, saying that they hold the Israeli regime entirely responsible for all of the unfolding violence. Posters of women and children being held hostage by terrorists were torn down by people with PhDs. And many of them, and I'm sure you've seen these videos, were captured on video, smiling and laughing as they did so. At the same time, the online world of know-nothing influencers coalesced to condemn Zionists, to brand Zionism, which is the movement for Jewish sovereignty in part of the Jewish homeland, as the Soviets had tried to do in the 1970s, as a form of racism. And this week, the professional talkers repeated obvious lies, such as the idea that 14,000 babies could die within 48 hours in Gaza. Venomous, untrue statements about Israel, about Jews, about supporters of Israel, and about the war against Hamas in Gaza have all chipped away at the old taboo against open anti-Semitism in the West and in America. The constant demonization of American Jews and of Zionists is how a democratic state and its supporters have been made into fair targets. It is how the permission structure for violence against innocent Jewish people and their supporters in America has been erected over the past year and a half. Growing up, reading and learning about Simon of Trent or other medieval blood libels, I wondered how something so unnatural, so deranged could ever happen, how lies could spread so far and so fast, how they could transmogrify into a movement, infect culture so comprehensively, and lead to deadly action, to murder of innocent people. Those who participate in this culture of lies and who now want to distance themselves from the murders in Washington, D.C., will insist that the alleged killer's acts do not represent them. In fact, they will say, and they have said, that it harms their movement. But how can anyone honest with themselves not draw a connection between a culture that says Zionists are anti-humans, that Zionists are even Nazis themselves, and the terrorists now attacking Jews in our country and across the globe? As this terrorist attack was being carried out on Wednesday night in Washington, I was sitting at another Jewish museum, the Jewish Children's Museum in Brooklyn, for an evening memorializing a young man named Ari Halberstam. He was 16 years old when he was murdered on the Brooklyn Bridge in 1994 by an Islamist terrorist. The killer later said that he murdered Ari for a singular reason. I only shot them, he said, because they were Jewish. The alleged murderer in Washington this past week may have shouted the words, "Free Palestine." He may have said he did it for Gaza. But Palestine and Gaza, that's not why he murdered Yaron Lischinsky and Sarah Milgrim. He did it because he thought they were Jewish. Among the many impressive people that spoke on Wednesday night at the Jewish Children's Museum in Brooklyn was Michael Mukasey, the former U.S. Attorney General. Here's just part of what he said. It's hard to believe, he said, that it has been 31 years since Ari Halberstam was murdered in an act of anti-Semitic terrorism. And it is indeed hard. It is harder still to believe that we are living in the midst of a widespread resurgence of anti-Semitism, not only around the world, but also in our own country, where many of us, and I include myself, he said, believed that although there might be occasional anti-Semitic incidents, anti-Semitism would never become a widespread phenomenon. Oh boy, were we wrong.